Good evening. Welcome to APTN National News. I'm Dennis Ward.
And I'm Melissa Ridgen.
On Wednesday, Justice Minister David Lametti addressed the Assembly of First Nations for the first time since replacing one of their own former regional chiefs, Jody Wilson-Raybould.
He faced tough questions but also made big promises. Jamie Pashagumskim has more from AFN Special Chiefs Assembly in Ottawa.
Indigenous voices are elevated and where Indigenous peoples are in control of their own destiny.
He promised legislation on the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples within a year.
Our government has committed to co-develop legislation to implement the declaration by the end of 2020. I know that Minister Bennett spoke about this ongoing work earlier this morning. I want you to know that I stand by that commitment and I am ready to do the hard work with you and with my colleagues that this entails.
Lametti said UNDRIP is crucial for decolonization. His promise comes a day after First Nations leaders honored BC Premier John Horgan for his province's new UNDRIP law. Crown Indigenous Relations Minister Carolyn Bennett said the feds will look to BC's work on UNDRIP and also to the private member's bill on UNDRIP that died in the Senate earlier this year.
We're not starting from scratch, that from Romeo Saganash's bill to Bill 41 in BC, that there are building blocks there.
At one point, Lametti referred to Wilson-Raybould, but not by name. Tsleil-Waututh Chief Leah George Wilson reminded Lametti whose hard work he is continuing.
I want you also to know, don't be shy about saying the name of your predecessor. The Honourable Jody Wilson-Raybould is our friend and our colleague who came from these floors here at the AFN.
Lametti said he's pleased with the work BC has done in regards to UNDRIP, and despite what other politicians have said, he looks forward to working with BC and Indigenous communities across the country for national implementation. Jamie Pashagumskum, APTN National News, Ottawa.
The leader of the Manitoba Liberal Party is calling on the Prime Minister to stop challenging the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal findings and move forward with compensation. Dougal Lamont released a letter he wrote last month to Justin Trudeau. In it, he says there is a child and family services to prison pipeline in Manitoba. In the province, there are more than 10,000 kids in care, and 90% are Indigenous. The tribunal ordered the federal government to pay $40,000 to each child and their families who were caught up in the on-reserve child welfare system. Lamont says Trudeau needs to step up and follow the order.
This is more than a political issue, it's a moral issue. This is something where the right thing to do is to compensate the people who've been affected. And that's what we need to do, and it shouldn't wait for another 2 months, and it shouldn't wait for even more negotiations.
Ontario is moving ahead with its new model of healthcare. The province announced Wednesday it has approved 24 Ontario health teams. One of those is the All Nations Health Partners, a group of 15 community groups from Kenora that includes the local hospital and the Kenora Chiefs Advisory Council. The new team will provide 24/7 support for patients and families accessing health care services in the Kenora area, including mental health and long-term care. The province says that the new approach should provide a seamless experience when moving between different healthcare providers. The All Nations Health Partners will begin implementing programs and services in the new year.
In British Columbia, bloody effluent spewing from an underwater pipe at a farmed Atlantic salmon processing plant on East Vancouver Island has tested positive for Piscine reovirus for the second time. PRV is a fish virus that could lead to disease and organ failure in wild salmon. After the contaminated bloodwater was first exposed in 2017, the provincial government immediately called for a review and audit of 28 processing plants. However, the Federal Department of Fisheries and Oceans is still debating whether or not PRV has the potential to impact wild fish, so the processing plant is in compliance. And for one hereditary chief, that simply isn't good enough.
We were assured that steps were going to be taken, that this situation was not going to get out of hand, which clearly they still have no control over this industry. We already know that the salmon are in incredibly dangerous dire situation. The problem is the migration route is basically the entire coastline. You can't have PRV-infected bloodwater spewing into these corridors. It's killing our fish.
Still in BC, still on fish, health officials there are warning the public about infected shellfish that could cause paralysis and even death if consumed. The BC Centre for Disease Control says that algae blooms in the ocean can infect mussels, clams, and oysters with a potentially deadly bacteria. Algae blooms can occur anywhere at any time of year, but the extreme cases have been found along southern Vancouver Island and Haida Gwaii. There's no way to tell if a shellfish is infected except by getting it tested.
When people then harvest it and eat it, they can get very significant illnesses, and the most significant one is PSP, or paralytic shellfish poisoning. If you eat some shellfish that has the toxin in it, you'll start with just a little bit of tingling on your lips or in your tongue, but this particular toxin interferes with nerves. People may start to feel like they're stumbling or they're not coordinated. And unfortunately, the next thing that might happen is that they start losing the ability to breathe.
And we want to hear what you have to say. Here's how to continue the conversation. Send your emails to news@aptn.ca. Find us online at aptnnews.ca and on youtube.com/aptnnews. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram for the latest Indigenous news. A new traveling project honoring the lives of missing and murdered Inuit women and girls launched in Winnipeg this month. The Red Mauti project was created by the Manitoba Inuit Association and is based off the art installation The Red Dress Project. As Brittany Hobson shows us, it's providing a space to design and heal.
Slowly, stitch by stitch, these pieces of fabric will be transformed from this to this. It's called an amauti. This is Grace Takumi's first time making the traditional parka.
The hardest part was the arm part. It's so many different pieces, and you have to try and figure out if it's not, make sure it's not upside down, and this part was the most difficult part, is the arm and the back.
The amauti is a coat worn by Inuit women. It has a large pocket in the back where mothers carry their children. Takumi is part of a group of Inuit women sewing the piece in honor of missing and murdered. It's part of an initiative called the Red Amauti Project. It is being led by the Manitoba Inuit Association.
It's like a puzzle. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 pieces to this.
Gail Grubin is the project manager.
We decided, we really should be trying to find a way to commemorate our missing and murdered loved ones. And I said, well, why not we use the theme of a red amauti? I mean, we'll follow the concept of, the First Nations and how they commemorate their missing and murdered daughters and sisters and mothers with the red dress.
The project launched in Winnipeg this month. It is supported through the federal government's Commemoration Fund, which was announced in June. Over the next year, the group will travel to 12 communities across the province, Nunavut, and northern Labrador. Each one will make its own amauti.
We want the message out there that, we miss the people that have gone, who are missing, who have been killed by domestic abuse and violence, and we just want to use it to say, we haven't forgotten about you.
The project also gives participants a chance to share their language, their culture, and their stories.
It was emotional, and it was good to see them let out their emotion out, and getting to know them was nice too. So I'm glad I was there to support them.
Grubin hopes to one day see the project displayed in a national gallery or exhibit. She says too often Inuit voices have been left out.
A lot of times we're a type of people who, we're not about the attention, but now it's time, we need to let people know that there are a lot of Inuit who have been affected.
Brittany Hobson, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
Coming up, we're going to continue our perspective series on the impact of climate change on the Northwest Territories.
And we'll bring you some of the highlights from today's In Focus, where climate change was also the topic. But first, a look at tomorrow's weather.
Starting on the East Coast, +2 with snow for Halifax, 0 in snow for Fredericton, -4 and snow in Nain, -4 and snow for Happy Valley Goose Bay, -1 with snow for Montreal, 7 below with snow for Chibougamau, 0 in London with snow and -2 for Ottawa, -7 for Sioux Lookout, Wawa, Timmins and Kapuskasing, -18 under sunny skies for Churchill, 20 below for Puckatawagan, 0 with a rain-snow mix in Winnipeg, -2 and snow for Brandon. Sunny and -7 for Saskatoon, 0 for Regina, -15 in Uranium City, 18 below for Stony Rapids. Welcome back. Finding working solutions for eroding coastlines in Canada's far north is complex and challenging. But according to Indigenous youth, it helps to understand the severity, and there's no better way to learn than to listen to elders. Here's our reporter Charlotte Mort-Jacobs in Tuktoyaktuk for part 3 of our Youth Climate Change Perspectives.
It's 2 degrees in August, a month once known for ideal temperatures in Tuktoyaktuk. Now, altered weather patterns from climate change bring stronger and more frequent storms. Northern youth are here because each have felt the effects of global warming in their home communities.
I live in Delaney, and our main resource is from the Great Bear Lake, and I talked about how much I want to learn about it because we notice over the years it's changing.
But the destruction this far north is like nothing they have ever seen. As sea ice melts, there are longer periods of open water, leading to bigger waves, thawing permafrost, and ultimately, rapid coastal erosion. It's something that Tuktoyaktuk elders Roy and Julia Cockney have experienced firsthand.
It used to be so much land across there. 40 years ago, you could, have nice beach, and you could walk long ways through the water. And the water is so high, it's really hard to work from the shore now.
The spring just lasts maybe 2-3 weeks. Years before that, it used to last longer. When you're traveling with skidoo and there's snow, you can travel. But out there in the land, there's ground, bare ground, puddles of water and soft snow, and you're not sure if you're gonna hit the soft snow next, and your skidoo gets in there and your sled is behind you.
Canada's Arctic landmass represents 40% of the country, nearly half of the far north's coastline. But less than 0.25% of Canadians live here.
How the impacts of southern businesses have impacted the north, because I don't see it like this back at home, because I'm more in the middle of the continent, so I'm not as far north as Tuktoyaktuk. And when we went there and I saw before and after pictures of the coastline, that just broke my heart, because if the way it keeps going, Tuktoyaktuk is going to be underwater soon. And they've had 7 storms already, and it's not even storm season.
And seeing is believing.
Before this conference, I wasn't as strong emotionally, and then when we got to talk to Roy and Julia and other people in the community, it hits harder now, because not only because when I think of climate change, I think it just affects my region, my people, and that's the mentality I always had, But then now I get to see other people's perspective on what they're affected by, and now I feel more emotional about it.
But having a dialogue around climate change with elders isn't without its challenges.
Elders today, they always grew up knowing the language, and like for us to not understand it, like if I were to ask them a question in English, they kind of like it to hear it better in their language so they can get a better understanding of like what's the question.
Here, and that's where they lived long ago, traveling from place to place, nomadic.
But it's not all doom and gloom.
Keep practicing.
And no matter what barriers youth may face, everyone here encourages each other to ask questions.
Speak to your neighbors or like even like people further out to see if you're having the same problems or like if it's different, and like it's a lot of learning experience when you're learning about the climate change.
According to youth, the first step in tackling climate change is understanding how serious it really is.
When we're learning about like how to live our lifestyle in the bush, our elders say we have to start them off young. And climate change, I believe, has the same philosophy. We got to start off young. Then we can carry that torch as we get older, and we can pass the torch to another generation of youth.
As access to hunting grounds wither, so do traditional diets. Tomorrow, youth open up about food sustainability and tour the territory's largest greenhouse. Charlotte Moore-Jacobs, APTN National News, Tuktaaktak.
The science on climate change is basically unanimous now that how we live is taking a toll on this planet. On today's In Focus, we discussed how Northerners feel about the changes that they see and how everyone, not just politicians and corporations, can live more sustainably.
Well, recently it's been getting warmer and warmer outside during the winter times, and even in the summertime I noticed that it's getting hotter and hotter. Just right now in Whitehorse, it's just yesterday, I think in Whitehorse, it was around -2.
I realized that there's quite a disconnection between how elders see climate change versus youth. I mean, there are a lot of youth that understand that this is a really big issue, but on the other hand, there's a lot of youth that I don't think see how urgent it is.
I think we have to get rid of some of the myths of the past, thinking that we can only have one crop a year, thinking we can't grow north. Northwest Territories, Hay River, Jackie Milne is running the Northern Institute, Farming Institute, blowing everyone away. Using regenerative farming. So she's got pigs, chickens, they just harvested Brussels sprouts about 3 weeks ago, okay?
Yeah.
And so we gotta bust these myths that we can't do it, because that's how they get you to come to the store.
Right.
Right? But our people have been growing all the way up into Thompson. They found squash and pots with seeds, in the stomach of mammoth that showed that we had been cultivating food way back, 10,000 years.
Another great discussion on the show today.
Yeah, I always have a good time with the guests that come on In Focus. Interesting people.
Time for another quick break, but stick around, there's more to come.
And here's the rest of Thursday's weather forecast.
Picking back up in northern Alberta, sunny and -8 for Peace River, 9 below in Fort McMurray. 0 with rain for Medicine Hat, -4 under sunny skies in Calgary. Showers and 7 for Victoria and Tofino, snow and 0 in Bella Coola. -12 for Fort Nelson, +4 for Prince Rupert. -30 in Old Crow, 14 below with snow for Whitehorse. -13 and snow for Fort Liard and Trout Lake, -27 for Norman Wells. 16 below and snow in Sax Harbor, 1 degree warmer in Paulatuck. -34 for Baker Lake, 32 below in Whale Cove. minus 29 in Arctic Bay, minus 10 in Pangertung.
Welcome back. Hundreds of youth from all over Alberta and British Columbia gathered in Calgary to share a bit of their culture while learning about others. Tamara Pimentel has the story.
A face-off in double ball begins with a teepee formation before the ball is thrown in. It's a traditional sport similar to lacrosse, and it's kept alive by those like Jaron Weaselbear from Piikani Nation.
At one time it was only played by the women, but of course times are changing, and a lot of the young men and young women are playing together.
Weaselbear learned double ball from elders.
We have a stick here that is probably about 3 to 4 feet long, and it is made out of the rabbit willow. And then of course we have the ball here. At one time the ball here was made out of the buffalo scrotum, but nowadays I make it out of leather, and I fill the two sides of with a balloon and sand.
Game on! Hundreds of youth in Western Canada traveled here to attend this 5th annual Resiliency Summit to strengthen their communities with culture and education in health and wellness.
And using the land, and kids could play games, and using their brains and the hands again, instead of always using the technology where the answers are always basically there for you.
The summit is organized by Ever Active Schools, a provincial initiative that supports healthy school environments in Indigenous communities.
Learn about our culture, our language.
To know someone else from a different place and to share what you have.
Traditional sports like double ball and Dene pull games are part of the summit. Peter Daniels from the Northwest Territories says Dene pull games were created to survive off the land.
So they would emulate hunting and harvesting situations, survival situations.
This game resembles pulling a fish out of water.
The stick pull is actually a game that works on grip strength. And they grip the stick that's so greased up with lard, with Crisco lard. And it's got to be Crisco, can't be tender flake. Back in the day, our Dene ancestors used to use bear grease.
Youth here can also learn some powwow dancing and take part in elder circles. Weaselbear says events like this can save a life.
I had an addictions problem with alcohol, and for me it's just getting back to the youth and showing them that you could overcome addictions through culture. Because for me it was the sweat lodge that helped me out, and as of today I am pretty much 13 years clean and sober.
He says it's traditions and culture that make Indigenous people so resilient. Tamara Pimentel, APTN National News, Calgary.
Double ball looks like a lot of fun. I really want to play that.
The greased hand pull is pretty good too.
Good story there. That's your APTN National News for this Wednesday. For the very latest, visit our website, aptnnews.ca.
That's also where you can find today's episode of In Focus, where we dug deeper into the impacts of climate change and how we can each do our part to live better. You can also catch an encore edition right after, or right tomorrow at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. I'm Melissa Ridgen. Have a great night.
And I'm Dennis Ward. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you back here tomorrow.